There we go. Now we're streaming. Let's see if this is working. Yes. Okay, good. Alright, I'm not going to go to it just because that might create a feedback loop. I'm going to go to it. Yeah, okay. I did go to it, but I muted it. I just wanted to make sure everything was working all right. Okay. I'm going to give this a few minutes, see if anyone shows up, if anyone's watching at all. I wonder why that doesn't show up. Okay, I think I'm just gonna go ahead and okay, this is coming out in high def. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and start. Hi, I'll start by introducing myself. My name's Kevin Brock. I'll give you a little bit of my background. I have 3 degrees. I have 2 from Columbia College, a degree in psychology and a degree in business administration. I also have an MBA, where I graduated summa cum laude with a 3.8 GPA. I've worked as an IT director for a company with over 800 employees. I also worked as a software development director, where I directed a team putting together business-related software. So I have a bit of a background in business. I also own several businesses, including I build and design and make custom pool cues with custom inlaid hardwoods, and I also have several websites. Just to give a little bit of a background as to where I'm coming from. I also worked in military intelligence for over 6 years. I worked down in GTMO. I have some interesting stories about GTMO I can tell you, and we won't get into that today. That's not what this is about. You know, I've been an avid listener and supporter of Ben Shapiro. I agree with him on almost everything. One thing I vehemently disagree with him on are implementing tariffs. Now, I'm not saying that the way Trump is going about it is the best way to do it, but I'm going to use this time. This isn't scripted at all. All of this is off the cuff. I'm just coming up with it as I go. So what I want to point out some validity to the arguments that Ben Shapiro uses against tariffs, and I want to point out the problems with his argument regarding tariffs. Now, Ben makes a valid argument. He argues that in a free market, it is better to have no tariffs, to let the free market truly work, and all of those things will work themselves out. The problem with that is, shh, be quiet. There's a major problem with that in regards to our current situation, and that is that we do not live or work or participate in a free economy. We're in a contrived economy. Let me explain that a little bit further. So, you know, in an ideal world, everyone would get paid a decent wage. Everyone Every company would pay a wage based on market value for that work, and pricing would act accordingly. That's not the world that we live in. It's just not. We have contrived wages based on unions, which have gone so far above and beyond their original mandate, where it was actual workers getting together and saying, look, we need these conditions to be different, we need them to be better. It's gone so far beyond that we now live in a market where wages are artificial. They are not real. So, and then we also are dealing, when we're dealing with the international economy or world economy, it goes beyond that, because you have artificial negative wages in other countries like China and like India. You have slave labor type wages where people are making, less than $800 a year is the average wage, or the average yearly wage in places like India. And so when you're dealing with that, you've got an artificial advantage. So Ben's argument is that there's economies of scale, which is basically that one country is going to have better resources and better ways of managing production, so that they're better at producing a given product. And then when you have another country or another location, region, whatever, that is better at making a different product, when those two companies exchange those products, they each get the better benefit of those lower cost products. And that's the base of his argument. And to an extent, that's accurate. But when you start getting into artificial wages, when you start getting into artificial environmental, that's the other thing. Places like China and India, they have artificial costs of production because they have such low standards for regulation. There's no way that the current production methods in China can work long term, can last long term. There's no way, because they're absolutely destroying their environment. Now, we've gotten past that to an extent. We've regulated environmental controls on production and on chemical waste, and even when you get into nuclear power, nuclear waste and whatnot. So we've gotten past that. So we have artificial controls on economy of scale in our country, and they have artificial controls and wages. With unions and with regulation, we have artificial economies of scale, because we are producing at a much higher cost than these other countries. So we could actually be more efficient than these other countries at producing goods, but yet our goods are going to cost more because of higher artificially induced wages and artificially induced regulations that prevent true efficiency of production. Now, is that a good thing? In some cases, yes. In some cases, it goes way overboard. In China, they literally, when you have to close down when you have to tell people that they can't leave their houses because the air quality outside is so bad that they will get sick and or die, that's beyond unsustainable. They literally are doing this for a specific purpose, and I'm going to get to that here in just a second. That specific purpose that they're getting at is control, is basically monopolizing against other countries, specifically our country, because we make more purchases than any other. Dog, shush. Shush. Stop barking. It's okay that there's someone else in the house. Shush. Sorry about that. So they artificially, so they do this with a specific goal in mind, and that's to produce a monopoly against other countries, specifically our country. The United States makes 30. It's gone down 1 or 2%, but we still make 36 or 37% of all purchases in the world That's one of the reasons why using tariffs and getting into a tariff war with other countries is always going to be towards our advantage. We're gonna have the advantage in any war of economy with any country, because we have such purchasing power compared to every other country, and typically any 3 or 4 major countries combined. So they want us to purchase their stuff, and us purchasing stuff from ourselves, while prices may slightly raise, it actually works out in our favor most of the time. So back on point, or back to the original point. So a country, let's take China, because we are purchasing more from China than we are from any other country. That's just the way it is. What happens is this: we have production in a given industry. Let's say electronics. Okay, we produce electronic components. Even now, I think now we even have military products that are made by China, who are not our ally. We are purchasing electronics that make up our military products from another country. Now, we may be programming them ourselves, but that doesn't... If you know anything about electronics, there are ways of embedding things that would be less cost effective, or more cost effective, to produce them ourselves than to produce them from another country and have to go through the links that would be necessary to ensure that there is no nefarious code or hardware installed in them. But beyond that, okay, so an industry like electronics producers. So at one point, we actually produced our own electronics in this country, in the United States. But then, as we started to purchase more and more from China, our industry for the production of electronics went down to the point where we have even our in-country based electronics producers don't produce most of the components. Most of the actual chip manufacturer is overseas, typically in China or India, where regulations make artificially... See, this is the key difference between what someone like Ben argues and me arguing the truth. It artificially produces economy of scale. It artificially produces efficiency, because they can't sustain the type of or environmental impact that producing those items at those prices long term. They can't do it long term. It's impossible to sustain it long term. And this is what happens. So as more and more companies require them to produce our electronics, require them to produce whatever industry it is, we become absolutely dependent on their ability to produce. And what happens is that someone might say, hey, well, if they raise prices through monopolizing production to our country, we become so dependent on them that they can raise the prices to whatever they want, and they can implement regulations, they can implement higher wages, they can do that and raise the prices. And then, at that point, we can just produce those items ourselves. Well, no, it's not that simple, because there's a thing called, what is the official term? I can't think of the official term. It's basically the cost of getting into an industry that you're not in. And those become exceedingly high. You have to be able to, it's like anything that evolves over time. The ability to produce silicon chips at a high density, like Intel's processes, AMD's processes for designing these silicon chips. That's just one example. There's many examples of price to get into market, you know, the marketing costs alone, then we're still at a huge disadvantage trying to do that later on. The more we put off getting into a market or having a means of production of these critical markets, the harder it will be in the future when we absolutely must. And that's not even taking into consideration, what if we were to go to war with China tomorrow and they just simply shut off all trade? If they shut off all trade and we no longer got these components, what would we do? Where would we get it? How would we get it? How would we develop those technologies of production in the time frame that we would need? What would we do for those 6 months where we're critically in danger of not being able to wage war because we need the electronics for our systems? You know, that's just one of the things. So now getting into whether getting into a more broad scoped looking at tariffs in general. Again, like I said, 36% of the world's purchases are made by the United States. We have 36% of the world's economy. It's degraded a little bit, not much. And the more we purchase from ourselves, the better off we are. Now, prices are going to go up because our wages are so much higher here. Environmental regulations prevent just wasteful efficiency. That's I don't know if that's a valid term to use. Wasteful efficiency in that you're not taking any regard other than pure efficiency of production. You're only considering the efficiency of your production, how cheap you can do things. And that's the only consideration that you're giving. You don't care about the environment. You don't care about polluting rivers. You don't care about poisoning the population. You don't care what wages you're paying people, that they have to work 16 hours just to put bread on the table and living in squalor. You don't care about those things. Well, as a nation, we've come to where we care about those things, sometimes a little bit too much. We've gone away from using the true free market and how the free market really, you know, I've always made this argument because this was, you know, this is not a Trump thing for me. Believe me, I've had these ideas for many, many years. In fact, I considered even trying to run some sort of grassroots campaign for this last election and run as for president myself. Now, I didn't. I'm a realist. I didn't consider it an actual possibility that I could truly become president, but I had considered it based on my ideals and how I thought that they would be best for the country. Now, so. Where was I? I tend to drift off. Like I said, this is not scripted. So sometimes I'll drift off and then come back and meander back to my original point. Oh, yes. So I had the idea of using tariffs, you know, which is one of the few powers that our country had actually given to government in the Constitution. The ability to levy.
I'm sorry, you want me to close it?
Yes, I'm streaming live. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. You guys may be wondering why I have microphones, de-essing filters. I actually have a home studio here. I'm a musician. I write and record my own music. So I have a full-blown studio. I'm using a compressor. I can use effects. I have a full mixer recording studio here, a 32-channel recording studio, basically, with studio monitors that I have turned off right now so that doesn't create feedback. So a lot of this stuff that I have, I already had prior to doing anything like this. Now I've done some video streaming for billiards. I'm a semi-professional billiard pool player, and Actually, I just noticed that I have my channel listed under sports, probably from when I did actually do streaming for billiards, and I have a few billiards videos. It's a relatively new channel. I haven't really spent a lot of time on it. I just wanted to come on and actually, put some truth out there, as people on all sides tend to look too generalized at things and don't really analyze it on an in-depth level. And I'm really not going all that too in-depth, but I'm sure as heck going more in-depth than saying, hey, in a free market economy, tariffs are bad. Well, yeah, in a true free market world economy, yeah, tariffs would be bad. You would want a open and free market to fully produce and pay people what they're actually worth. A free market does that naturally. That's what. Now I remember what point I was trying to get to. One of the things that I wanted to support and wanted to point out as being what made this country great is something that we've drifted away from. We've gotten towards these huge mega corporations, that conglomerate corporations that really are not good for a free market. Free markets need competition, and massive competition. Now, maybe not so much in production, because massive production or larger scale production has worked out really good for providing us with a higher technologies, higher economies of scale. It has worked out really well in that regard. But as far as large mega corporations like Walmart, as far as distribution, that's where we need to put our focus on small businesses, local businesses. You need to support your local businesses, but that becomes impossible because of economies of scale, because they can't afford. Now we're getting closer to the point technologically where we can, but again, it turns a very, very complex issue and makes it a little more simplified than it should be when you're talking about what plans you want to implement. Because obviously having cheap products that you can purchase from China makes it easier for mom and pop or small businesses. I don't want to say mom and pop, but sole proprietorships, partnerships, small corporations, small LLCs. LLCs is more of a protection and you can get into the weeds really easily. And I may have to, I've been streaming for 23 minutes now. I can easily take this out to 2 or 3 hours. I'm probably not. I'll probably go for, I don't know, maybe another 20 minutes or so, maybe more than that. But I'll probably come back on and I'm going to start doing regular podcasts or video casts of these on these issues to get more in depth. The one thing to consider, I kind of lost my train of thought there. What was I thinking? Economy. Oh, small businesses, sole proprietor. Oh, LLCs. Oh, right. So, small corporations are basically a protection. You see a lot. Let's get into the wealthy poor dichotomy for a second. You you see all these super wealthy Hollywood elites, and I hate even using the term elite. They are not elite in almost any way, but we refer to them typically as elites, Hollywood elites. They're not. They're uber wealthy, doing very little to earn it. Let's put it that way. So they're easily manipulable by the left, or they're easily manipulated by the left. And that's because they've got a lot of things, a lot of stuff, basically almost anything they want, they can buy. and they didn't really do a lot of hard work to get there. In some instances, in some cases, they worked very hard, and then so they get manipulated by the left into thinking, well, you don't deserve that. What about all these people that their ancestors were slaves, and your ancestors made their ancestors slaves, and now you need to, you need to make it up to them. Of course, they don't want to make it up to them with their money. They want to make it up with your and my money, the people that actually do work for a living. Currently, I am a mud engineer. For those of you who don't know what that is, a mud engineer is really a drilling fluids engineer. I take samples from, I stay on a drilling rig, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, and I go out and I take samples of the lubrication fluid that they use to drill holes into the ground to get out oil. And depending on the type of soil they're going through, we measure losses of the drilling fluid, and we determine what soil type they're going through. I do chemical analyses on the fluids, and I tell them what materials they need to add to it and in what quantities, after doing calculations as to how much dirt is actually being pulled in by the fluids, and lots of math and analyses to determine what quantities and what type of materials, LCMs typically, loss control materials, to determine what they need to do to make it drill better, so that they don't get those losses, so that they can drill easier through the ground, through those particular spots. Beyond that, I'm also an engineer. I love to design and build new things. I have some interesting designs that I'm working on prototyping for that could do a lot. I'm not going to get into the details of those for obvious reasons. One, I don't even have a temporary patent. Most people aren't aware that you can easily get a patent. It costs $69 for a micro entity, which is a company with less than 3 people. I think it's if you have 2 to 3 people in your company, you can get a patent for $69. Now, that's not your permanent patent. That is a 1-year temporary patent. To get your permanent patent, it costs another $2,000 to $10,000, and you have to do a more intricate research into whether it already exists, or if you're improving on another device, if it doesn't contradict with previous patents and is truly actually improving. I have a couple of patents that I've developed for the billiard industry. Funny story. I was at a pool hall in Alabama, in Huntsville, Alabama, and I saw a guy working on a tip over on a lathe, and I noticed he was doing one of my designs. And so I walked over and said, "Hey man, what you doing?" And he told me. He said, "Yeah, I'm doing this thing. I saw this." He mentioned a relatively well-known cue maker who was doing it, and then said, "Yeah, and this guy on the AZ Billiards forums had also had originally come up with it and was also doing it." I said, "Yeah, that was me. I actually have it patented. Not that I'd have the means to sue you for patent infringement for a billiards related item, since the billiard industry is one of the lowest in the, at least in this country." Anyways, I digress. I'm switching. I've gone way off topic. Getting back on topic. So yes, when you have a free open market, it is absolutely better to have no patents. Now I've gotten in my own head. To have no tariffs. If you have no tariffs and you're really truly working in a free economy, that is the best way to go. Now, that's not even considering that a lot of these countries have massive tariffs on U.S. imports. Obviously, any country who has tariffs on the U.S., we should immediately put counter tariffs on them at the same levels that they have. That's just common sense. If Canada is taxing our imports at 25%, we need to tax their imports at 25%, not at 2.5%. Trump is right in that regards. We have been taken advantage of by all of these countries, and we will continue to be taken advantage of if we don't do something about it. Now, again, like I said, I'm not necessarily supporting Trump's methodologies here. His methodologies can be a little specific, I guess would be the best word. He attacks the... You can't attack the steel industry if you want them to change their policies towards the cattle industry or the the dairy industry. You can. It's a valid tactic, but you're going to get into a trade war. Now, I think the U.S. is situated to win, or at least be dominant in any trade war they get into with anyone in the country, just because of our spending power, just because of our purchase power, because of the fact that we're purchasing 36% of the world's goods. That puts us in a great position to get into a trade war, especially when it's obvious that we've been taken advantage of. They need to be able to sell to us much more than we need to be able to sell to them, because this is what's going to happen. And I saw this the other day, because I saw that what was it, Harley? Oh, it wasn't Harley in regards to what I'm about to say, but Harley is a good example of companies that say, hey, this is going to hurt us a little bit, so we're going to move some of our stuff overseas. Well, I don't know if you should do that. Sure, move your production of what you're going to sell there over to there. Japan's done that with us for a long time, even without us putting huge pressure on them with tariffs. But getting to the point, if I remember the point, kind of drifted off there again. No, okay, so right. So I see on the news the other day that one company had to lay off like 50 employees or something like that. But yet the steel industry, a steel company decided to open up a plant where they're going to have 700 employees or 800 employees or something like that. And that's the way that this works, is that you're going to have some industries, when you start a trade war, you're going to have some industries that come in and say, that affect you negatively. But the question is, what's the net result? And anytime that we have more industries that are formed in the U.S. And make it so that we're purchasing from ourselves rather than these other countries, it's better for us. When we're making 36% of the purchases in the world, but most of that money is going, or not even most, let's say that 35% of our purchases are from other countries. Let's just say 35%. When we're making 36% of the purchases in the world, if 35% of the monies that are coming in, it's similar to the idea of illegal aliens working here for cash, and they're sending most of that money back to themselves. So even if our cost for, say, yard work goes up, or strawberry picking, or fruit picking in general, even if the costs go up, all of that money is coming back into our country. It's not being 60 or 70% of the money is not being sent to some other country to support their economy. It's supporting our economy. So yes, individual prices on some items will go up, but the money is being kept in our country to support our country. So it's a zero. It's not even a zero-sum game. It's a positive sum game to our advantage. Yeah, I mean, that's the whole point. When you make 36% of the world's purchases, but you're sending that money to other countries, and it's supporting their economy through supporting their workers. We don't get. We spend all this money on electronics. All that is making China richer. It's not making us richer. But if we are willing to pay a little bit more, if we implement import tariffs on electronic goods or electronic production of silicone chips and whatnot, coming from China or India, then the companies that start producing those chips here will be employing people that live here. We'll be purchasing other goods from here. All of those things go towards supporting our own economy and making us more rich as a country. America has to come first. That's another thing that I've heard Ben Shapiro say is that. Sorry, my ear's itching. It is hot out there today. I don't know if you guys know that. I mean, I've got one watcher, and that might be me. But it is hot out there today. But yeah, so what was I thinking? Another thing that I heard Ben Shapiro say in regards to this. What was I talking about? I was talking about China. Oh yeah, purchasing our goods from us. I can't remember the specific thing that I was going to remark on that Ben Shapiro had argued. But let's just say that it didn't take into account that we would be... Oh, yes, right. That's what it is. He sees the tariffs as a tax on our own people. And that comes back again to saying that in order for that to be true, in order for it to be a tax on our people and not a tax on the country that is trying to import the goods or the companies that are trying to manufacture goods over in other countries, in order for that to be true, you have to have a free market. It's not true when you're not in a true free market. When you have artificial low production costs in countries with low regulations and low wages, and artificially high production costs in a country with artificially high union wages and artificial high costs of production due to environmental regulations, then it's not a free market. It's not. It's just not a free market. And when you don't have a free market, tariffs are a good thing. Or they can be a good thing manipulated in the right way. A country that doesn't make 36% of the world's purchases wouldn't be in a good position to get into a trade war. And, that's why we see a lot of rhetoric. But when it comes right down to it, these countries will capitulate. They will. They will come to the table. Merkel was already saying that she was willing to come to the table. Now, with crazy-ass Mexican president, the president of Mexico that just got elected, we're probably going to get into a trade war with them regardless of anything. He ain't going to be willing to come to the table on anything. So get ready for a trade war with Mexico. We need to put up a wall. We need to control our borders. I don't think, this will be for another podcast. I'm going to have to change the category to political, I think, because I think most of these podcasts that I'm going to be doing are going to be based on politics. We have got to start taking the threat of Islam seriously. I mean, yikes. And I'm not saying this from an uninformed mainstream media propagandized perspective. I was an intelligence operative for the military for 6.5 years. I know stuff that I can't tell you. I know stuff that I know, in fact, that was my first wake-up call. I'm going to get into that for a little bit on this podcast, just a little bit. My first experience with knowing that the mainstream media told lies was way back in the day. I say way back in the day, like it was really all that long ago. It was back in the mid 2000s, and the media was putting out that the government, or that the U.S. was torturing detainees at GTMO, at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, by flushing their Quran down the toilet and disrespecting them. I don't know if you guys remember that. Well, I'm going to tell you what that really was. What that really was. Okay, so you have to understand something about Islam to start off here, because they only consider it the Quran when it is in Arabic. If it's not in Arabic, to them it is not the Quran. So they would request English translations of the Quran from us. And us, being the good guys that we are, we would give them these English translations of the Quran. They so we would give them these English translations of the Quran, and they would take them and they would rip the pages out. Now, forget about any of those pictures that you've seen of Camp X-Ray, where it was metal fencing, basically cages. That was only there temporarily for like the first, I think, 6 months that Guantanamo Bay was used as, well, that JTF GTMO existed, which is the portion of GTMO that actually housed detainees. That was only there for like the first 6 months. And then as soon as they had built facilities, they moved them over to there. And then they actually built a full-on, like, $11 million prison. Actually, it might have been more than that. I don't know how much it cost. They put in a full-on prison for some of the detainees as well. And they were getting rid of most of the detainees when they built it. So I don't even understand why they did that. But anyways, to understand how this worked, I have to explain to you what the detainee cells looked like. They were metal corrugated buildings with a central pathway down the middle that the guards could walk, and then cells on either side. Now, the cells had no air conditioning or anything like that. They were open to the elements, but you know, in that part of Cuba, I think it was 85, like 360 days of the year, with very little fluctuation. But they had like grating along the top of their cell, so they had fresh air all the time. And the entire cell was made out of corrugated metal. And then towards the back in the center of their cell, there was toilet bowl shaped hole in the floor. So you had like a toilet seat shape of steel, and then a hole in the center of that. So what they would do is they would rip pages out of this English Quran, which they don't consider the Quran, and they would stuff it in that hole. And then they would, I'm not going to curse, they would defecate, urinate, ejaculate, spit, basically anything that you can think of to produce human waste or human fluids. They would do it on top of those sheets of paper that they had ripped out of the English versions of the Quran. And then when the guards would come by, they would pick those up and throw it at the guards. Now, any time that you were inside of the actual detainee area, like there were tiger teams that actually did the interrogations. There were I forgot the term that was used for the analysts that actually went through the data and prepared intelligence reports and did briefings. What was the term for them? I don't remember. The tiger teams are the ones that actually did the investigation or the interrogations themselves. So we would so that they would throw that at the guards. Now, anyone who went into the where the detainees were held had to put tape over their name tags. Now, if you know anything about the military, you have to wear a tag with your last name on it, and then on the other side, it's the branch of service when you're wearing BDUs. Now, the JTF all wore BDUs, desert camo, in fact. We all wore desert camo BDUs, and we had to have our name tags on there. You had name tags on the back of your pants, and you had name tags across your blouse. Now, you had to put tape on top of that anytime you went inside, because if they knew your name, they would put out fatwas, they would put out hits on your family. So we also had to regularly Google ourselves in specific sites. I say Google, but it's not really Google. It's Cybernet and higher classified networks that we had to do searches on ourselves to make sure that no one had put out hits on our family. So anyways, so they would throw all of these biological materials, bio cocktails, on the guards as they would walk by. Now, the guards weren't allowed to take the day off or go take a shower or anything. They had to continue their shift so that they did not let the detainees know that they had affected them. So that was a crappy day, to say the least, for those people. I never had any thrown on me. So what they would do is they would go into these cells and they would take a stick, like a mop handle or broom handle, and they would shove those pages down into the hole so that they could no longer do that. And then they would go to their lawyers, which we provided them, and their lawyers would go to the media, and the media put out that we disrespected their Quran by flushing it down the toilet. No, we shoved something they didn't consider the Quran, that they had put there themselves, and crapped on it, and urinated on it, and ejaculated on it, and spit on it, so that they could throw it at the guards. And we shoved those down the toilet hole. Now, of course, the media never tells the truth, and that was my first taste of it. The other thing is torturing detainees. Now, I'm going to use a caveat. I'm going to put out a disclaimer. I did not sit in on, nor do I know what the CIA did with their interrogations. I can tell you that there were very few interrogations done by the CIA. The military did the vast majority of the interrogations down there. Yeah, I mean, it was a constant, ongoing process. We were constantly interrogating detainees. Another thing that people, I mean, the people that were supposed to be on our side, like the translators, they looked at you like they wanted to murder you on the spot. Even the people that were supposed to be on our side. We were paying them to be on our side. I don't know how much we could even trust that what they were telling us was a true and literal translation of what was being said. All I know is that when I looked into their eyes and tried to be cordial with them, they looked at me with hatred that I can't even put it into words, how much hatred they looked at me with. And so I kind of lost my train of thought again. Yeah, so, oh yeah, torture. The military did not torture them. We didn't have to. They tortured themselves. Their leadership told them that they had to put out, that they had to not eat. They were on hunger strike. Of course, we weren't allowed to call it hunger strike. Well, we started out calling it hunger strike, but then they came back and they told us that we couldn't call it that anymore because it was offensive to them. Do not believe the hype. The military has gotten just as politically correct as every other facet of this society, and it is ridiculous. Anyways, so we didn't have to, because the interrogation booth was the only place in the entire facility that their leadership could not see them eat. So all we would have to do is pop in a DVD, pull up a chair, pop open a Papa John's carton, and start munching. And as soon as we said, hey, you want some of this? They would spill the beans. I mean, it wasn't always Papa John's. Sometimes it was McDonald's. And some of you may consider giving them Papa John's or McDonald's torture. But not in the way the mainstream media wanted to put it out as. So, anyways, back on topic, tariffs. So, I could put together some formal positions on this and really get into the weeds. You have to take considerations when you do decide to implement tariffs. You can't just carte blanche put tariffs on everyone, because then you're talking about implementing an isolationist society that's completely isolationist. And while America has the resources and the ability to potentially do that better than any other country on earth, I'm willing to put that forward. We are more prepared and capable of being completely isolated and self-sustaining more than any other country on earth. But, I mean, there's problems with that. You can't be a fully isolated society. There's huge problems with that. One, you're not going to get strawberries year-round like you're used to. We have to deal with south of the equator, especially if we want perishable items that don't grow here during the winter. We need to be able to import some things. So if we go in the route of a trade war that would put us in jeopardy of having to be totally isolationist, it's not going to be fun. It's not going to be good. But we can't go in the direction that we've been going, where we eliminate necessary sectors of the economy. If we continue to eliminate entire sectors of the economy like we have been, because China and India can produce them so much cheaper because of their slave wage type labor and their complete disregard for any type of regulations whatsoever, it's not going to be good for us. Because it'll get to the point where we have completely isolated ourselves out of markets, especially technological markets, where the price to get into market, the price of entry into market is so high as to make it impossible to get in. Now, that gets me back to where I had originally gotten distracted from, and that is we need to start supporting small businesses. We need to implement corporate tax breaks on small businesses. And I'm going to get yelled at for saying this. We need to raise them on the mega corporations. We need to make the market more manageable and more supportive of small businesses. Sole proprietorships, partnerships, even if they're LLCs, but they're set up in a way. I mean, I know that it's completely different between an LLC and a sole proprietorship, but you're seeing less and less sole proprietorships being formed because of the personal liability that's involved. So most of the small mom and pop stores, the small businesses, the 5 to 10 employees, the things that really make America great, that make more opportunity for more people, we need to support that. We need to implement policy that is going to support that and going to what's the term I'm looking for? There's a specific term I'm looking for here. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and cut it off here, and I will continue to keep streaming. I will come up with better, more specific things in the future.